Hi guys, how are you? I'm Kirsten from Ekco. I've got my colleague Connor also here and Mr. Jeremy Seligman from eXpd8, who I'm sure you all know. I presume you guys can see that. Connor, Jeremy, are you okay to see that?
Yep.
Everything's perfect.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Oh, well, floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Welcome everybody this morning to our presentation on what to do in relation to a ransomware attack. As you can see, I decided that I would actually physically dress up on Halloween, but the biggest joke here that I said to everybody else already is this is actually what I wear on a Sunday, right? Because I'm an ordained deacon, believe it or not. But it doubles up as a very nice Halloween costume. I hope you agree with that. So we've quite a short, packed-filled agenda. So I'll just speak to you about what kind of the state of the nation is at this particular point in time. And from that, then what we will do is we'll go on to talk about, Connor will then do a presentation. I also have just a brief 2-minute video, because the problem is that most people, what happens is that they go, well, what am I going to do when a ransomware attack hits? The problem is that when that actually happens, if you can go to the next slide there, Kirsten, please.
Sure.
It generally happens where people go, the gate is bolted. Now what do we do about a ransomware attack? They say, oh, we have to get all this software. And you'll find that, even with people like the HSC and everybody else, what they said was, oh, we didn't have money for this, but all of a sudden a big pot of gold suddenly appears to say, oh, how are we going to protect ourselves? And then next slide there, please, Kirsten. So what you'll have seen all over LinkedIn, on social media, on Garda Síochána websites and everything else, everybody's talking about how to protect yourself against hacking attacks. What happens when you get one of these emails? And I think we've all got one of these emails where it says, hi, I'm stuck in France, the hotel, I can't get out, my credit card's not working, can you please send me money? And it looks like it's coming from the right person. And the problem with that is that as soon as you click on that email, the person's in. And that's what generally people think actually physically happens. But what I'm going to show you is something that normally happens also. So if you can just play the video there, please, Kirsten.
Sure, give me just a second and I'll pull up that video.
So I don't know if anybody could hear that.
Is the sound not working on that?
No.
No.
Of course it's not. Why would it do that?
So if you like, what I can do is if you can't get the sound to talk through it or to work, I'll actually physically talk through it. So as you can see,
Perfect.
Most of you will probably recognize Dr. Phil here, right? Well-known American TV host, and he's talking to Kevin Mitnick. And Kevin Mitnick is talking about, people just think that they get a cyber attack from an email or from somebody actually physically hacking into their computer, but that's not generally what happens in the real world. So one of the biggest problems is that Kevin is here. He's about to say to Dr. Phil is, do you have an Apple or an Android phone? And of course he goes, oh, yeah, I have one of these. They're absolutely fantastic. He said, oh yeah, great. He said, look, he says, what you do is, you go into the shop or whatever it is, and you buy your USB cable. And what you do is you plug it into your phone, you plug it into the side of your laptop, and you're transferring your photos, your files, or whatever it is that you're doing. You might even just be charging the phone. But the problem is that as soon as you plug that in, there's a piece of ransomware on the USB side that actually physically installs on the computer. Now, it's actually instant. You wouldn't even see it. And what Kevin shows is that how this system would actually physically slow down to show you how the ransomware gets installed on the computer. And he's then saying that it doesn't make any difference where you are in the world in any shape or form. Once you put that piece of software, there could be a guy in a garage, or there could be a cyber crime, or not a cyber crime, but an active unit sitting somewhere that could be anywhere in the world, and they have complete control of your computer. So they can do whatever it is that they want. They can turn on your camera, they can look at all your financial data, they can look at all your emails, they can, and I've seen this myself. There's a very, very good piece of software where it runs, you put in the person's email address once you get onto the computer, and it tells you absolutely everything. It'll tell you from that, it'll say, this is the very first car you bought. here's your bank account details, here's who you send all your emails to, here's who you connect onto social media. They have absolutely everything that they want. And then what happens is that over time, they then start taking all the information across, putting on stronger bits of ransomware. So then when you actually physically get attacked, what happens is that they're then into your computer and say, what are you going to do? We have all your files, we have all your information, pay it. And that's what happens when people go, right, the bolt's closed, or the gate's closed and the bolt's done, there's nothing that you can do. So if you can go on to the next slide there, Kirsten, please.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so basically what happens is that people think that there's multiple ways. How many of you gone to conferences and you've seen a USB stick sitting there in the bowl? What you do is you go, oh yeah, grand, I'll take one of those and I bring it home. Or somebody finds one in a car park, and I have to admit, I've done the same thing myself. I went, there's a USB stick. I wonder what's on that. I wonder who owns it. And you put it up. That's how they actually physically get you. And I've seen it happen in one of the largest companies in the world. A guy went in for an interview, and he said to the girl, I forgot to bring my CV with me. Would you mind printing this out? Oh yeah, no problem. And she put the USB stick into the computer and printed out the CV, gave it to him. He actually walked out of the building then, but the entire network was actually physically infected. The problem is that all of your devices, no matter what you're using, whether it's your phone, whether it's your laptop, whether it's your text messages, and you're not using end-to-end encryption, you're then prone to be hit by a cyber attack. And what we've decided, what we're trying to show you here is that there are things that you can do to protect yourself. And one of the best things to do to protect yourself is to have a backup and disaster recovery business continuity plan in place. And that's where ourselves and Ekco have come together, where we can say, okay, you've been hit by a ransomware attack. It doesn't make any difference because we've continuously backed up all your data, all your information. We put it up into the cloud. So as soon as that attack hits, what we can do is we can just roll it back. And it's much better for you to say, okay, I've lost 15 minutes of work, or I've lost an hour of work, or I've lost 2 days of work, than to have to actually physically pay one of these cyber criminals these vast amounts of fines. So I'm going to pass you across to Connor now. Connor's going to speak about how the Ekco backup solution works and how it can help you. And then at the very end, what we'll do is, if you want, in the chat box there, you can sign up and just type in your questions. And at the very end, what we'll do is we'll go through the questions with you. All right, so over to you, Connor.
Yes, now thanks very much, Jeremy. I'm sorry, I was fiddling with the unmute button there. So I hope my slide deck is showing up there on your screens okay.
It is, yeah.
Great. So look, good morning. There's a lot of attendees here. So I just want to say from the very beginning that I'm not going to get too technical on this. As Jeremy's outlined, there are several ways in which a company can be hit, and personally a person could be hit as well, and then that could filter through to an organization from maybe their own computer, depending on your user models, and as mentioned before, bringing USB keys, for example, and plugging them into corporate devices. So there's a lot of different ways it can be, a company can be attacked, but what we're going to focus on specifically here is, I guess more importantly, the methods and most prominent methods for which ransomware can affect an organization, and then also what's going to happen and what you're going to do about it if, God forbid, it happens to you. So a little bit about me. So I'm the technical director in Ekco. I'm here 7 years as of 5 days ago. But mostly, I guess this year, I've dealt with 6 very significant large ransomware incidents within Ireland. So the first kind of, I guess, point I want to get onto here is the cybersecurity landscape. So I know a lot of your clients, Jeremy, are in the legal sector, so we've kind of focused our attention on the legal industry. But the left-hand side, just as an example is, and we've got US numbers there, but you'll see the size of the cybersecurity attacks and the frequency at which they've been increasing, as well as the cost of cybercrime. Now that number is continuing to rise as these guys pick up smarter and smarter ways to attack organizations. These are, criminal entities nowadays that are running, back in back in the 90s, hackers used to be a kid who'd figured out how to do something pretty smart, and then for the crack would try and attack certain companies or banks or things like that. And then we saw the evolution of that going to viruses, right? Back in the day, we used to get viruses on our machines that would just break our computers, basically. And that used to be a risk for business, but it used to be probably more as a pain point for end users because we were so easily attackable back then, because it wasn't very complicated to do it. And along with that, we also got the rise of the things like adware and stuff onto PCs, where you just get ads popping up all over the screen, because payment method systems were quite they were quite basic back then, so it was very easy to compromise a machine and get people to click on links that they shouldn't. And obviously nowadays, with the use of Bitcoin as payment systems, I mean, yeah, the methodology in which these guys can extort and get money out of an organization makes them nearly invisible to law enforcement. And so things like Bitcoin are quite attractive to these attackers. So what we've shown here on the right-hand side of the slide is specifically around the legal industry. There's a report there from 2020, but the Legal Technology Survey report showed in October that, as we can see, MFA percentages across the industry are quite low. Although we see the highest number on the board there, apart from file encryption, the reality is MFA is quite easy to implement and can be quite useful at stopping attackers getting in. God forbid they get your username and password. Well, if they don't have your MFA, they still can't get in. So it's quite a simple one to implement, but it's quite significant in trying to stop attackers from getting in. Obviously, file encryption can make it harder in the event of an attack for attackers to read the data, and they're going to have to go after your key encryption server to try and get those keys. Disk encryption, kind of prevents people from worrying about laptops being stolen or cars being stolen with laptops in the boot, which again can be an attack method that people would use. And lastly, you'll see intrusion prevention detection is actually the lowest number, and yet that's the technology that will help a company to realize that someone is inside the network, as Jeremy had pointed out. Even the interviewer or interviewee, I should say, who got their USB key plugged in, an IDS system would help them detect that, and yet the penetration of that within the legal industry is actually quite low. So I guess the next question then is, oh, sorry, my slides aren't moving. There we go. So why would people target legal firms specifically, rather than, let's say, the general world here? So first, attackers are drawn by the sheer quantity and quality of valuable documents, including the description of technical secrets, business strategies, any due diligence, mergers and acquisitions, and any kind of financial data. It's far simpler potentially to attack a legal firm rather than attacking a corporation or a business. You've probably all seen recently the Pandora Papers, the latest P-level paper example. We had Panama back 5 years ago, and the Pandora Papers right now making all the headlines as of October. The amount of data that the guys managed to get out of that and share it across the web is quite shocking. And it's a prime example of how easy it was to attack a firm who were representing multiple clients and getting that treasure trove of information, rather than simply attacking each one of those corporations directly, especially considering that perhaps the security standards within the legal firm wasn't quite as high as maybe some of their clients might have used. So we kind of focused, I guess, in terms of the conversation around ransomware, around the methodology of getting in. As Jeremy pointed out, there's lots of ways we've seen the phishing emails and things like that. And what we've seen, especially in the incidents that I've run this year, of the 6 of them, all 6 were caused by, sorry, not all 6, one of them was not. So 5 of the attacks were actually caused by an end user mistake. The 6th one was caused by a vulnerability that was exploitable. And unfortunately, that vulnerability had actually been known and publicly available for attackers to use since 2018. So quite an old one, and a mistake there from the customer around patching. But of the 5 that were specifically user-based, what we've seen is that those users can make mistakes, right? We've all done it. Even as Jeremy said, we've picked up USB keys, or we've clicked on a link we probably shouldn't have, and then realized we probably shouldn't have. but it's not, look, it's hard to protect against. It's not necessarily the end user's fault. Training can be part of it, but also technologies play a part in that as well. So if I was an attacker, or as I've been seeing with the attackers this year, the question is, what are they going to do? Are they going to try and attack your network? Do they even know where your network is? Would they try and attack your firewall to do it? Could they try and attack your Wi-Fi? Maybe your Wi-Fi isn't very safe. And as Jeremy's example, maybe they send you a couple of USB keys or leave them lying around strategically so you plug those in. They're all very effective ways to get in if the security standards aren't high. But if the standards are still quite high in an organization, the easiest way to get in is actually by the user. Especially depending, as mentioned before, on the kind of training and familiarity that they would have with being attacked. So if they've got the user, what they probably want to do is move from the user across into the rest of the organization. They want to try and compromise more systems. They want to gather some data. I got an example this morning, actually, of one of our new hires in Ekco who sent me an email whereby they had CEO fraud sent against them, but it wasn't against our corporate email system. It was against their own personal Gmail, which was I found quite interesting, because what had happened there, the attackers had obviously managed to look on LinkedIn, perhaps, saw that he was a new employee, thought maybe he wouldn't know the CEO and have direct communication with the CEO. So as a result, decided to try and send an email to his private email account, because then again, it wouldn't be going through our email filtering service. So these guys they're pretty clever, you know, and you can be targeted and not even know about it. So anyway, it's small digress, but it's just an example, I guess, of what these guys can do and what they're willing to do. So what I want to talk about now is I want to give you a little example of one of the types of attacks that we saw earlier this year, and this is pretty standard, I guess, for any organization that does get ransomware. I'm going to walk you through it both, I guess, at a technical level first, nice and high level, hopefully, and then after that, I want to show you the kind of the business case impact that goes along with that and how long this kind of attack can take. So what we've got here is the user, the technical, and then the destructive piece. So what's happening in this attack is we're moving from left to right. So in this example, as I mentioned, the user got a phishing mail sent to them, and they thought, okay, that looks like a legitimate email. They clicked on it, they opened up a link, it prompted them for their 365 credentials. Who doesn't use 365? So it's an easy one. If you were to put that out there, you probably get 90-something% of organizations using 365. Therefore, it's quite easy to spoof a 365 login page, and chances are you're going to get a hit. They might type in their username and password and then realize, oh, it brought me to an office.com website afterwards. It didn't go to where I thought it was going to go to. So maybe I'll raise a hand and say, potentially, I've done something wrong. Or maybe they noticed it didn't prompt them for MFA. If they had MFA, same thing. So in this case, that didn't happen. A mail went to a help desk user who clicked on a link. They executed some software on their laptop. As Jeremy mentioned, it can just run, and from there, it can pull out all kinds of data from the machine. And then they took that away along with a list of passwords that have been used on the machine. So who here hasn't accidentally, clicked a link or been a culprit, I guess, in that regard? As I said, the fault isn't necessarily on the end user here, but around maybe the security systems that are going to be used. Because the next step after that, what they did was they surveyed the customer environment, they surveyed the network, they managed to jump onto one of their administration machines over a remote desktop. They installed some remote management software onto their servers, and cleverly they used one of the very same remote software tools that the company already used for themselves for IT administration purposes. They had a third-party company who co-managed some of their estate, and they used a tool. So they used the same tool. They got a 30-day free trial perhaps, but they were smart enough to try and hide that because they figured that might get under the radar, and it did. Next thing they did after that was they tried to scan the network, try and find other devices that were available on the network. And then from there, they found their hypervisor system along with all their domain controllers that were available in the office. So this is at this point, it's important to notice that this all happened because they got access to just a help desk user who was just trying to be supportive. This software was executed on the machine. From there, they got passwords. From there, they moved across into the rest of their wider system. And at this point, they kind of stopped. They kind of took their time. They said, okay, we're going to sit here for a couple of weeks. We're going to learn about the estate. We're going to scan as much data as we can. We're going to try and exfiltrate some data if they can. and try not to set off any alarms, and they're going to sit in a network. And that's quite scary. And it's scary for a number of reasons I'll get onto later, specifically around how do you know how far back they've been inside your systems, and then how do you recover from that, especially if they're sitting there with software on your machines for quite some time. However, what had happened was they eventually, they hit the alarm bells, unfortunately, for them, whereby they located the backup servers and realized they were caught. Their users had been spotted. They saw administrators starting to log on to servers that perhaps they hadn't logged on to recently, and realized they were stuck. They installed another remote software deployment tool onto the backup servers to try and cover their tracks. And then using that, they then decided to encrypt the entire company. In this example, by the way, I should point out, this was about 2,500 users of an organization, so not a very small estate. And when they pushed out this ransomware encryption onto the users' machines, they got to about 850 machines before the network analysis people were able to realize this had happened and get people to turn off their computers or plug them out from the network. Thankfully, due to COVID, there was a lot of people working remotely. They might or might not have been on VPN. And as a result, they weren't able to get to all the devices that would probably otherwise have been plugged into the network. So we started with a simple click on a phishing mail, and what we've ended up with now is 800 and something machines across the organization encrypted, including every single server. And the last thing, as I mentioned here, they did was they located and deleted their backup servers because the backup servers were on premise. Yeah, obviously, the upside story here is that these guys weren't stuck completely. The reality is they had cloud-based backups as well. They replicated those backups, not just on premise, but also off premise to the cloud. So that's the attack. Started, no, sorry, go on to the next slide. It started from the user level about 3 weeks before they did anything. So they were sitting in the network, they'd gotten in, they were looking around, they were understanding the estate and understanding where all the servers were and how complicated it might or might not have been, as well as trying to find the crown jewels. That took about 3 weeks. Then during business hours over the 3 weeks, they logged into the systems and tried to perform tasks. Again, clever way to hide themselves. They weren't logging in at 4 in the morning and triggering alerts. They were only doing it during the company business hours, and they did this, as I mentioned, through that kind of learning behavior piece. And finally, the destructive piece that always happens, they hit them on a Friday evening. It's classic, it's 5 o'clock, everyone's driving home. They hit them with the ransomware, no one's able to respond. By the time they get home, they've had a good hour, hour and a half maybe of this spreading across the network and hitting their systems. So Friday evening, the company gets ransomware, and then from then on, they were working into a recovery phase. And the recovery phase itself, for example, we're talking about here, took 6 weeks, realistically, to get the majority of their systems back online. Depending on how complicated your systems are and how many users you have, obviously that number can be quite different, as long as you have your offsite backups. So, did I go one too far? No, I didn't. So, what can you do? So, the obvious thing to say in terms of ransomware attacks is to have the security technologies in place to prevent it. But with the nature of security attacks at the moment and the cybersecurity landscape itself, it's not really feasible to say that you're going to guarantee that your security systems can block everything. It doesn't work that way. Zero-day attacks are, we probably heard about these things before, whereby brand new security vulnerabilities get exploited, and then people are able to use those to get into your networks, and your security systems aren't going to be able to catch those. So they're a reality. So you can't say let's just protect and let's just put up the walls and pull up the moat. Put up the drawbridge over the moat and try and prevent anybody getting in, because they'll climb over the wall. So we have to make sure that we have a good recovery method in place as well. So when in the event of a ransomware, what's going to happen is obviously the business is going to be impacted. Someone's going to realize that they've been encrypted, that their server isn't powering on anymore, that they have maybe one of those classic screens on that says, please pay us 99 Bitcoins or we're going to release all your data to the internet, or you'll never get your data back. And what's going to happen next is you're going to have to kick off an instant recovery process. In instant recovery, there's two tracks that run. We have the investigation side and we have the recovery side. In the investigation side, you're going to need a security company to come in, to analyze the systems. They're going to pull a lot of data out of your environment. They're going to look at logs, try and figure out, was it 3 weeks ago they got in? Was it 90 days ago that the guys got in? And all of that information is used to inform the recovery plan. Because it's great saying we have offsite backups, we can get the servers back to the hour or the day before they were encrypted. But if the software has been sitting there for weeks, then the reality is they'll just kick right back off again if you haven't had the time to find them. And these attackers are pretty smart. They're used to making sure that you can't undo what they've done. That is the nature of their business. So while the investigation's happening, there's a couple of caveats people don't normally consider. So I just want to explain some of those for the audience here, which is that while business is being lost, potentially there's brand reputation damage, maybe it gets out into the to the media, and of course the systems are down and your clients are annoyed at you. The reality is this forensic analysis piece might be kicking off at a weekend. It's going to be expensive. You're going to have to get a lot of security people involved, and they're going to be working a lot of hours, but they're going to be potentially taking end user devices as they go through the analysis piece. They might realize actually it came in through Paul's laptop. We want to look at Paul's machine, but maybe they're not really sure. So they want to look at 6 or 7 different machines at the same time and trying to analyze all of those. So now those people have no device to work with. And maybe it's been encrypted as well. So they have to go through a process there too. Maybe they have to look at restoring the backups from their device first, and then from there looking at logs and evidence that goes with it. So that can be quite, it's quite involved. It's normally quite intrusive and takes up most of the time. The senior business managers will spend a lot of their time focusing on that, because it also involves things like the Data Protection Commissioner, the Garda National Cybercrime Bureau. If there's been a loss of data, any kind of breach of PII, as you can understand, that's quite critical. That's what they want to know about pretty early on. And that's where the business is going to focus on from the investigation side. Do we know, have we any evidence that data was compromised and it was exfiltrated or is available on the internet? That's going to work tandem with the recovery plan. So as Jeremy said, we're all talking about backup and disaster recovery here. Well, there are 2 components of your BCP plan. Have you got one? Have you got one that actually covers ransomware? One of the examples that I like to point out to people is that, have you got a communications plan that doesn't rely on your email? If you say, it's fine, we'll use everyone's phone number, but it's in your Active Directory, it's in your email system, but you haven't got email. Maybe you don't have email. Are you trying to recover your data to the same location? Is that server even available? Has it been taken for forensic analysis physically? Or have you got enough free capacity on your system to even restore to? So in the event of a virtual system, what normally happens is the IT team will rebuild the VMware system with a new one. So that takes time. And then only then are they going to be able to look at restoring servers, because they want to be sure that the VMware system itself wasn't also compromised, or the hypervisor system wasn't compromised. And that kicks on into your normal BCP plan after that, which is, well, what do we recover first? How long is that going to take? Have you tested it? Have you been through a plan recently? So they're the key dual streams. The investigation piece could take 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on how complicated it is. But normally you have a pretty good feel around what the security investigation is going to return after about 2 weeks. But your recovery plan, well, if you didn't have one, or if the data you're trying to recover it takes a lot of time and a lot of engineering effort, then perhaps maybe that's going to take a number of weeks. With all these incidents that I've worked, what you end up seeing is that from the moment go, everyone jumps in, and there's a lot of effort put in from people to try and help solve the problem. But that means a lot of long hours, a lot of days over the weekends, and a lot of people would end up getting tired, potentially burnt out. So you're going to need a lot of resource. And even as Jeremy said, maybe before the incident, you didn't have the money to spend on security. Well, all of a sudden, in the event of this, you do. You're going to have to spend to try and get yourself out of this hole and get the business back working again. So that's the scary bit, right? So what can we do to eliminate the threat? Well, as mentioned, anti-phishing is an obvious one, because then we can, protect the users themselves. I'm only going to focus on 3 of these, but I'm not going to go through them all. So anti-phishing is an obvious one. Number 2 is going to be MFA, turning it on, because if they do have your credentials, but everything is MFA'd, then the reality is, unless you give them one of those pop-up tokens on your phone, they still can't get in. That's also a good indicator as well. If you start getting random pop-ups on your phone, someone might have your password. It's probably a good idea to change it. One of the next things we usually see is the use of an IDS or an IPS to detect the network. However, with a lot of the working from home and the nature of that kind of staying in the future, we're seeing that kind of technology stack is moving away from the office and the data center and what would have been the firewall, seeing that moving now more towards the endpoint devices. So we're seeing a shift from antivirus alone as a solution to an EDR product, which will do endpoint detect and respond, and it can use behavioral analytics to understand what your normal user looks like. So when they start doing things that are outside their normal scope, like running PowerShell scripts on their machine to find, the list of users who logged in recently, it's able to alert accordingly and alert the security team. And then finally is we got to make sure that we have those backups, that we've got a DR and BCP plan and that we've tested it. As mentioned in these examples that I've gone through this year, people had BCP plans, but they didn't actually have a ransomware version of that. They hadn't really figured out, well, okay, we've always thought, well, what if we lose the building? We might have a second location, but what if we just lost a server? We might have a second server. That's really high availability rather than business continuity planning. But what they don't think about is, well, what if we have no servers? What if we don't even trust our network? We end up shutting down our network, shutting everything off and having to start again. And that whole process of getting a new clean network up and getting new clean servers up can take numbers of days. And as a result, immediately the BCP plan is out of whack. So I've mentioned the classic phishing mails with the 365 sign-in pages. That's, as I said, 5 out of 6 of the major ransomware incidents I've dealt with this year. And we've talked about the 3 key points around, well, what can we do? Backup, it's critical. Testing it and making sure that we're able to come back from a clean state and a healthy state, making sure that those backups go back far enough. As mentioned, if someone's in your network for 3 weeks, that's maybe not so bad, but what you might have to do is have granular restoration of services. We've seen the reports that I think an average time an attacker is in your network is something like 265 days. I think it's somewhere around there at the moment before they're actually spotted. But in the event of ransomware, it's usually quite shorter, a much shorter time frame, but it's normally around the kind of 2 to 3 week kind of period when they've figured out everything they need to do around your environment, and therefore it hits you the hardest, really. They also might look at things like if they can get access to your backup server, they might look to see what your retention policy is. And if it's only set to 2 weeks for the backups, they'll wait 2 weeks. So knowing full well, whatever you're going to restore is going to have their software on it. They're going to get right back in again, and they're going to kick off the same encryption again. And then you're going to be considering paying. So testing the data, having it outside the organization. And a small one, although it's a significant one, is do you have cyber insurance? Recovery isn't cheap. As mentioned, you're going to get a lot of people working a lot of hours, and you're going to need someone to jump in and work over the weekend. It's very costly, and if you have to buy new servers because they've been taken away for forensics and getting those last minute, that's going to be expensive. If you have to restore up into the cloud and all of a sudden you're running in a public cloud environment, that's not cheap either. So cyber insurance is a key one to have. And you're probably going to, even if you didn't have backups and you didn't have the data available in a second location that was immutable, you might be considering paying. Well, there's a couple of key things on that. Obviously, they recommend not to pay, but if you're in a regulated industry, it might actually in fact be illegal because you're knowingly paying money to criminal entities. So you got to be careful of that one too. So for the key takeaways, we've talked about it, is have a backup plan, have a good BCP plan, make sure you've tested it, make sure you've considered what it would look like if there's a ransomware incident, change your passwords, have MFA, the kind of normal stuff that we should have on the users, and make sure if you actually need a disaster recovery plan, make sure it's suitable for the business. Some companies would like to try and use their backups as a disaster recovery, but haven't tested the restoration of their entire environment from backups. Maybe they've done a test against a single server or a set of servers rather than the entire estate. When they try the entire estate, they might realize it takes an awful lot longer to restore those servers. And as mentioned before, it might not even be to those same servers. There are other things you can do. You can do vulnerability scanning against your environment, penetration testing. There's a lot of security-based stuff you can do, but the fundamentals of how you're going to recover, all of those security products are there to detect and prevent. But if it happens, you're going to need your backups. There's nothing else that's going to work for you, I guess, other than maybe paying the money and rolling the dice on whether or not they're even going to decrypt your files for you.
Thanks a million for that, Connor.
Yeah, I guess we're over the questions. I kind of rambled through that one a bit fast.
No, actually, I think you're right on time. We do have a few questions come through. So I will just start it off with, which actually this one just came in and I think it's a really good one. Is Office 365 not backed up by default?
Sorry, I was sitting on mute. No, no, it is not. Microsoft will only store your live data. So if you delete, well, there's two things to consider there. First of all, if you delete a mail in a mailbox, it'll go into your user's recycle bin for a period of time and then it's deleted. But accounts themselves, if mailboxes get compromised and deleted, no, there's no way to recover those without a backup product. Microsoft do not keep backups of your data by default.
Okay, and also I suppose it may not happen by, well, it can happen by mistake, but say it happened on purpose, not even by an outsider, but by an insider. You know, do they have access to those backups? Or I suppose if you leave that with your IT provider, then it's no one else can access those backups from inside the company. Yeah,
and that's probably over to why we have, you know, clients of Jeremy's here in the first place. They're using these guys as their IT provider and probably managing the 365, but they're the guys who are going to be running those backups.
Yeah, the problem is that depending on the Office 365 plan that you have, and most companies go with the small business plan or the small business premium. By default, Microsoft will only save an email in effect for 30 days after it's been deleted. Now, as the admin, you can actually see if a person has deleted a file and restore it, but after 30 days, that's it. So you have two options. One is that you have an Ekco style backup disaster recovery plan where we can keep a retention policy on that, or you go on to one of the much more expensive plans with Office 365, such as like an Enterprise E3 or an Enterprise E5, which has legal retention and all that type of stuff. But and you can specify that it holds it for 9 years or whatever. But that's extremely expensive, particularly when even with a company that has 5 users or 6 users. It can be the difference between €10 a month and €35 a month. It's a lot of money to actually physically be spending on it. So my recommendation would for the much smaller organizations is to go through. Now it depends on the quantity of emails that you have and everything else, and the size of attachments, but to use a backup DR solution from Ekco as opposed to going onto one of the higher plans on Office 365.
Stuff. This question came in, it's what's the best way to determine if an email is work related or an attack?
Okay, so as Connor showed you there are a couple of different ways in relation to that. You should always look to see, not necessarily the name of the person, but where the actual physical email address is, right? So you could say, if it's somebody that you recognize and they're in a particular organization, make sure that the email is physically coming from that. One of the other things that you'll find as well is that, so for example, my own email address, my personal one is like Seligman's @ So if anybody's writing to me, they'd say, hi, Jeremy, or they'd say hi to my wife because we share the email address. Whereas if it's just coming to Seligman's, it's a fair chance that this particular email is an attack type email. So you got to be careful with that. You can also, one of the other questions that came up in relation to this, and to be honest, I would have thought you were fine. There was no problem getting videos or images from a company that you felt was reliable. So like the customer, the person here is asked, you know, is it safe to open USB sticks from doctors with medical records, or, you know, what about getting a video recording? Well, I did a cybersecurity course, it was over a period of a year, and I learned things like, for example, if you get a video or you get a photograph, and the photograph or the photo, it looks absolutely perfect, right? But embedded in behind it is actually malicious code. So you think you're getting something that's completely normal, and it's not. So the reality is that people talk about, and I hate this phrase, I really do, zero trust. You know, like the X-Files, trust no one, everyone's out there. It is a case of zero trust. You've got to have tools and applications such as Threat Locker installed on your system. So if somebody does send you a file, or somebody does, you know, send you an email or whatever it is, it kind of effectively puts it into a sandbox and says, hang on a second, we need to check the checksum of this particular file against, you know, the manufacturer, Adobe, Corel, Microsoft, or wherever it is, and make sure that the file is perfectly all right, and that it matches the digital signature. Because if it doesn't, you are going to be getting affected. And you might think, that type of thing doesn't happen. I know that a number of years ago, there was there was a company that all they did was supply video editing software, graphics software, you know, and they put it in the package box and everything went out, but they didn't know that their own servers had been compromised. So when the actual application went out to be physically installed, it had a virus on it, and thousands of companies got infected with this, right? So the only thing that you can do is, again, unfortunately, it's, you know, trust no one, trust nothing. So you have to have applications that are actually physically installed onto your systems that will monitor these applications. So as soon as you put in a USB stick, or you open up an email, or you're downloading a file, or it has a zero trust. It goes, okay, I'm putting this into a sandbox. Is it okay? Yeah, I've checked it. Now the reality is that it's not going to catch everything. Okay, that's the unfortunate thing. It's like a virus. A virus is only as good as its last update. You have to have the belts and braces approach. So it's not just a case of saying, I have my zero trust software, such as Threat Locker. I also need to have my Ekco backup and disaster recovery to actually physically find everything that's there as well. So there's quite a few things that you have to try and take into account. And these are tools, as your consultants, as your IT service provider, that we can actually physically help you with and implement quite easily. So I hope that answers
there
that.
Was just a message to say that they couldn't hear you, Jeremy, but I can hear you okay. So I hope that's not everyone.
It was just one person.
I could hear him fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. Sorry, did you have anything to add to that, Conor?
I would say that this whole seminar is being recorded, and we will make it available to everybody afterwards. So if you want to play anything back, also to say to you that we will be sending out a brief questionnaire. It's about 4 or 5 questions, just about how you found this webinar. Did you find it helpful? Did you find it useful? Would you like to see other webinars of a similar ilk on this? And if you want somebody from eXpd8 to get in contact with you to discuss the different options that are available to you.
Okay.
And there's a link at the end of this as well. So it's in an email or a link at the end.
Yeah. One other thing, it's just a small thing, but it's maybe a little tip, is when you look at emails on your phone, it'll only normally show you the name of the person, but it won't show you their email address. But if you look at it on a computer, for example, or with Outlook, you'll probably see, well, you will see the name, but also then the email address. So if you're just trying to determine at a quick high level, this mail says it's from my CEO, and probably not. Let me just check it out on the computer. No, it says @gmail.com. Clearly, that's not his email address, because that's not my corporate domain. Little things like that. And as mentioned by Jeremy, there's a lot of security-based products you can use to help detect if you even get the email in the first place by, you know, anti-spamming and anti-phishing. You can also then look at the mail, and most of the time they stand out a little bit. You know, there's something specifically wrong with it. Why is my CEO emailing me? Or why is my MD sending me this message, given that he could have phoned me and he probably would have phoned me? So that's weird. You know, other things like maybe the language isn't quite right. Is there a link in it? Is there an attachment? You know, normally those are red flags. And as Jeremy mentioned, maybe those things need to go off into a sandbox first to check the link to see if it goes to a legitimate website, if it's not a fake 365 page. So there's normally little stuff that would kind of stand out. End user training is the best way. Get familiar and understand what a safe mail looks like and what one doesn't. And if you're in doubt, pick up the phone. People don't do it enough these days. They used to a lot more, and we used to all be physically based in the same location. Pick up the phone and ring them and say, did you send me that mail? You might find out they didn't.
Or the other thing is that you can actually physically contact us, and we can have a look to see if the mail might be infected. You know, and it can come from people that you actually physically trust. So I know, for example, in another company that I had worked for a number of years, the CEO got an email from a friend of his who was a CEO in another company, and that file was actually physically infected. And he went, "But I saw it was from you, Paul. You know, so why would I think that it was actually physically the file was actually infected?" Problem is that he didn't look at the email addresses where it comes from. The other problem to remember is that it was actually only last year, right? There was a company that was under a cyber attack, and they sent out an email saying, "By the way, we think we're under a cyber attack. We're going to send you an email around how to, fix this set of instructions." About 5 minutes later, the attacker sent around the email and said, "Oh yeah, we've worked this out. Click on this link." Of course, people thought, there we go, we're trusted because they're inside our network. Clicked it, and that was it. Everyone was actually physically down. I know that a number of companies, they constantly talk about cyber attacks, cyber security. What are we going to do? It's a ransomware attack, and it's all over the news. And unfortunately, that's the world that we live in now. You will find that they're not just targeting large companies; they're targeting everybody. They're targeting small companies. They're targeting individuals. It doesn't make any difference. Anywhere where the cyber attackers think that they can get physical money from somebody, they'll do it because it doesn't cost them anything to do it. They'll do things like they'll go out and rent machines, they'll go out and rent ISP space, and there's no traceability. And particularly with the whole area of cyber coins and cyber payments and crypto coins and everything else and cryptocurrencies, there's no actual physical way of tracing it. A lot of companies don't admit to actually physically having a cyber attack, because it's bad publicity for them, it's bad publicity for the company, and they fear that they're going to be losing clients. And unfortunately, solicitors have some of the most confidential information out there, because you have information about your clients, you'll have information about people's estates, you'll have information about companies. You're the ones that are going to get attacked most of all, because you have the most valuable types of information.
Great. And I think this last question, I think you might have been alluded to it, Jeremy, but I know, Connor, is it safe to open USB sticks received directly from doctors, medical records, or from An Garda Síochána? And a follow-up to that, sometimes from clients with video recording of an accident like a dash cam.
Absolutely not. Unfortunately, you think that you're getting information from a safe company, and they're not in any shape or form. You don't know, for example, what ransomware protection applications or software, and you would think that An Garda Síochána or whatever would have the safest information out there. That's not necessarily the case, as you've seen yourself. So you have to have a zero trust policy put in place, and the only way of doing that is to put it in, again, the belts and braces type approach. You've got your Ekco software with your disaster backup and continuity recovery plan. You also then have things like Threat Locker to act as your zero trust. You have your antivirus software. Not only have you antivirus software sitting there, you've got antivirus software sitting on the firewall. There's so many things that you have to do just to give you one level of, or that high level of protection. Because you've got to remember as well is that if a hacker finds a way of getting in through a particular brand of firewall, he's going to have access to getting through a vulnerability on every firewall. You'll also see things like, it doesn't make a difference whether it's Microsoft or VMware or whoever it is, they are constantly bringing out patch updates. You've heard the term Patch Tuesday, and that's because they've identified a vulnerability. And most of the times they've identified a vulnerability because somebody has already perpetrated an attack and they're patching everybody else to stop that attack from happening. So you have to have your software on premise. You have to have your backup, your DR, and your Threat Locker to give you that overall protection. So I hope that answers that question for you.
Yeah, and just maybe to add as well, the zero trust approach of don't trust any USB keys is critical. I would say as well, there's look, the internet's quite fast these days. You can send data, and there's lots of safe ways to share files. And a lot of those sharing mechanisms will include scanning to make sure that the content within the shared file is also safe as well. So, but the reality, I know as well as everybody else, the reality is if a customer walks in and says, "There's all my files," and it's on a USB key, you're going to be tempted to plug it in. You want to try and avoid that as much as possible. If they have to, they can, as I said, share it across a sharing tool on the internet. They can print it out, whatever methodology they want to use, transfer it to you. If it's video, same thing. They can put it on a video site. I mean, YouTube, you can set things to private if you really want to. There's also other methods of sharing. So I would avoid it as much as possible. But if you absolutely had to, plug it into a machine that you don't mind deleting. And you won't have one.
And the other thing here we have is another question that came in and says, if you receive an email and click on the link, don't enter your 365 details. Is your system compromised? Sometimes yes, sometimes no is the honest answer to that, because as soon as you click on the link, it's like plugging in a cable. As soon as you've made that connection in any shape or form, in the background, the software instantly installs it. You don't necessarily have to go on to another website. But it's not just that. So for example, a lot of people get text messages recently saying, please make an appointment for your COVID, sir. Here's your appointment. And people are ringing up and going, yeah, but I have my details. Say, oh, can you confirm your phone number? Can you confirm your date of birth? And then people were actually infected, because they had all their data there, so they're able to steal it. They were able to then hack into systems, and you're gone. So there's, it's not particularly a nice thing to do, but people are getting infected all the time. And the thing about it is that it's not a high cost to implement these systems. It's very, very low. Okay, so you can look at doing. It depends on the size of your organization, but most companies would probably get away with a DR, business continuity system, including one test per year where we could do. Now we can do more if need be, but you're probably looking at somewhere around 250 to 300 euros a month for that. Okay, to use something like Threat Locker to give you that zero trust protection probably works out about roughly somewhere between 8 and 10 euros per user per month. Now, okay, an organization of 5 people, it's probably going to add on 350 euros a month, or 4,000 euros a year in total. But how much is a cybersecurity attack going to cost you as an organization if all your systems are down? If you can't access your email, you can't access your payroll, you can't access your client files, and that's where you have to try and say, do it. There's no point, and I hate to say this, there's no point in coming back and saying, we've been hit with ransomware. Can you help us? Well, did you have a backup DR plan in place? No. Did you have Threat Locker in place? No. Problem with that is then it's too late. And that's the problem that most companies do. They wait until it's too late. And one of the very first slides I put up there was, what are you going to do when you've been attacked? It's not if. Okay? You are going to get your systems attacked at some stage. So it's about being prepared, having the right protection in place, and we're here to help you.
Well, look, I think there might be one or two, but I'm conscious of time, so I think we should leave it there. But thank you everyone so much for joining. Like we said, this is going to be recorded, so we can send that on. There's a short survey at the end, so if there's anything you liked, or as much as we like to hear how great we are, we might rather hear what we can improve on. So please let us know. And have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Connor. Bye.